Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about the surface area of prisms. So what you're going to need is a pen or a pencil, a notebook, and a calculator. So the first thing we have to talk about before we can talk about surface area is what is a prism. So hopefully all of you should have known this from previous math classes, but if you have not, that's why we're talking about it. So the definition of a prism is that it's a 3D object that has two faces, or what is known as bases, and n number of rectangular sides. So prisms are named after their bases. So if we look at the picture below, we have a triangular prism. So the face or the base, sometimes those words are used interchangeably, because if you see that this triangular prism, this triangle, usually when we think about bases, we think about bases being the bottom, and then there's a height happening with it, right? So that's a really rough sketch, but usually we think about bases being on the bottom. So that's sometimes why they're called faces, because you can lay any kind of 3D object down however you want to draw it. So you can draw it so that the triangle's on the bottom or that it's facing forward, right? And then there's a square prism, a rectangular prism, a pentagonal prism, a hexagonal prism, and an octagonal prism. So prisms are basically any 2D shape, and then you just take that shape. So if we have a rectangle, right? That's our 2D shape. And then if you just add the third dimension of a height, that is what is a prism. So when you take a 2D shape and then you just add a third dimension of a height, that is what a prism is. So for today's purposes, we're only going to look at finding the surface area of rectangular prisms, just because that's the easiest one and we don't have to worry about any other ones. Okay, so what is surface area? Surface area is the sum of all the areas of all the surfaces or sides of that 3D shape. So we're going to find the area of each one of these shapes or sides, so the top, the bottom, the front, the side, the back. We're going to find the area of all those rectangles, and then we're going to add them all together. Remember, when we see sum, we should think add. So surface area is still two-dimensional because it's just the area of the surface. So when you think about like wrapping a gift with like Christmas wrapping paper or birthday wrapping paper, if you were to lay that wrapping paper all out with just the edges, like assuming you don't use any extra or you don't have any of those flaps, this is what is called a net. Not that that's important, but the point is that if you unfold all that wrapping paper, it turns into a two-dimensional object, or it's measured in square units. Okay, so let's look at some examples. I should probably explain what the formula is before we look at examples. So the surface area of a rectangular prism is going to be 2 times the length times the width, plus 2 times the width times the height, plus 2 times the length times the height. So basically, if you don't want to remember the formula, all we're doing is taking the rectangles areas and then adding them all together. So like if we look at the bottom, for example, it's length times width, and then there's a bottom and a top that are the same, so that's where we get the 2 times length times width. So when you find the area of a rectangle, it's just length times width, or the bottom times the top, or the side. So that's what we're going to be using. So this is the formula. Here, I'll erase the page so you guys can see it. So it's going to be 2 times L times W plus 2WH plus 2LH. Okay, so now let's look at some examples. Alrighty, so example number 1. So we have this rectangular prism, and they were nice enough, or this picture was nice enough to gray out the bottom. So the bottom's length times width is 6 times 3, and then the whole height of the prism would be 4. So this is L, this is W, and this is H. So let's remember our formula. So from the last slide, surface area is equal to 2 times the length times the width plus 2 times the width times the height plus 2 times the length times the height. So surface area is going to equal 2, and now we just plug in the numbers. L is 6 times W is 3 plus 2 times W was 3 and the height was 4 plus 2 times the length, which was 6, times the height, which was 4. So now you're just going to take into your calculator 2 times 6 times 3. 2 times 6 times 3 is 36. And then we're going to take 2 times 3 times 4. 2 times 3 times 4 is 24. And then 2 times 6 times 4 in our calculator is 48. So now you're going to add all those numbers up. 36 plus 24 plus 48. So surface area's final answer is going to be 108. Don't forget your units, centimeters, and remember surface area is squared units, so centimeters squared, just like area. So I want to point out before we move on to the next problem that we have to remember PEMDAS, right? So you're going to multiply before you add. So you should multiply this number, multiply these numbers, and then you get to add all three of those numbers together. So if you're plugging these things into your calculator, make sure you do this first, write down your answer. This next, write down your answer. This one next, and then plug into your calculator these three numbers added together. Okay, with that, let's look at another example. Okay, so now our picture looks a little different, but here's L, here's W, and the height is written on the left side, but that's okay. So our formula is 2 times L times W. So that's going to be 2 times, and I'll write it with non-parentheses, so 2 times 10 times W, which was 3. Then we're going to take 2 times W, which was 3 again, and the height was 4, plus 2 times L was 10 times height was 4. So 2 times 3 times 10, that's the first thing I'm going to plug into my calculator, is 2 times 10 times 3, which is 60. Now you're plugging into your calculator 2 times 3 times 4, which is 24, and then 2 times 10 times 4, which is 80. And so now you're going to plug this into your calculator. So 60 plus 24 plus 80. Your final answer for surface area should be 164. Our units is inches squared. So that's my final answer. And we have one more problem for you guys. So you order a present from Amazon for your sibling, and the gift is going to come in a box that has a width of 3 feet, a length of 6 feet, and a height of 2 feet. You want to wrap the box in wrapping paper for it to be a proper gift. So in order to do that, we have to figure out what the surface area is so we know how much wrapping paper we need to buy. Okay, so this time they didn't give me a picture, they just gave me the dimensions. So they said W was 3, so this one's 3, and then the length was 6, so this is 6, and then the height was 2. So surface area is going to be 2 times 6 times 3 plus 2 times 3 times 2 plus 2 times 6 times 2. So remember, you're going to do all the multiplication in your calculator first. So 2 times 6 times 3 is 36, plus 2 times 3 times 2 should be 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 2 times 6 times 2, which should be 24. Yes. Okay. And then you're going to add these three numbers in your calculator. 36 plus 12 plus 24. And that should get you to 72. And the units is feet squared. So our final answer, or how much wrapping paper we're going to need, is 72 feet squared. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have for you today, is those three examples. So make sure you get those down in your notes, and make sure you get the formula written down somewhere so you can reference it for your homework. Other than that, have a great day.